Okay, so I am back to continue part two of me talking about and explaining the film The Counselor and talking about some of these spiritual concepts. Well, a lot of the spiritual concepts that humans face, that is all embedded in the film. So continuing on, it is a cautionary tale about greed, and it is about what happens to a man that becomes so obsessed with his own sense of self-concept, like a narcissist. A lot of the characters in this film are narcissists, so they are very concerned about themselves and how they can all kind of play each other. The counselor being, having a very expensive habit of upgrading his lifestyle, as a lot of lawyers do, and also Raina, his business partner, who's in on the heist. Well, the traffic, I mean, in the sewage containers. It's like the stage is kind of set for this whole thing to kind of go down. And it really is the counselor just going, yep, okay, let's go with it. And after all of the advisors that he's been given, in terms of the Bolto wire, which was the wire that was talked about at the start of the film that constricts the victim, and within 3 to 5 minutes, it basically cuts off their head. It was all indicated, particularly that the Mexican drug cartel that are overseeing this transaction, they are particularly merciless with lawyers, as you could imagine. So Laura, the counselor's girlfriend or fiance, she is so innocent in all of this. She has no idea that the counselor is, in on this whole thing. She doesn't know. She's kind of like the price that he's ultimately going to have to pay. It said we always hurt the ones that we love the most. And so after the counselor goes and meets Westray, Brad Pitt's character, they kind of have a chat about Raina's lifestyle becoming increasingly lavish and him needing to pull off this heist, which is a really big, it's a very ballsy and huge undertaking in terms of what they're trying to actually smuggle through the border to sell. He mentions that it is net after all, it's about $2,000 a kilo, and there were over 21,000 ounces. Plus that's the cocaine before it's even cut and distributed. So over offshore type of thing, roughly net, he mentioned that it was going to be around $20 million, and that Westray advises him that, you've got to have overseas bank accounts. You have to be very careful about how you go about this. And of course, the counselor already knows this because he's dodgy anyway, and he knows all the tricks of the trade. And so he proceeds. Raina's club is opening up and will be ready in a couple of weeks. And the counselor is wary, but just feels like he's pulled off so many other things that, it's all good to go. So later on during that day, the counselor goes to one of his clients that he's representing, and she's an inmate in prison, and her name is Ruth, played very well by Rosie Perez, a Latina actress. And she's on trial for murder, and he's in there representing her, and she gets a moment where he gives her a cigarette. They have a bit of banter. She's like, although she has a very small role in the film, she is a crucial part to the film with her son. So coincidentally, this is where a lot of determinism comes in, and, that whole, everything's connected kind of thing, is that Ruth's son is a high level cartel member himself, and he's known as the Green Hornet. And so he was arrested for speeding on his bike. He's got the helmet, which is green, and it is he basically has a Japanese bike that he was pulled over for speeding. And of course, she asked her lawyer, the counselor, can you get him off? And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll pay his fees and let him go. What did he get pulled over for? And she said, well, he was doing 206 miles per hour in a, so he's like, oh, okay. And then when the police pulled her son over, he had over $12,000 cash on him. So of course the police took that straight off him, as a lot of police would, and kept it for themselves, particularly in parts of the world like, New Mexico and things like that. And so there's a lot of corruption everywhere. Everyone's kind of corrupted and kind of fucking each other over in one way or another. The system is corrupt. Wes Ray knows it's corrupt. Raina knows it's corrupt. Malkina is absolutely corrupt to the core. And of course, the counselor is also, thinking he's going to help her out. And yes, I'll pay his bail costs and get him out. And Ruth says, yep, cool, thanks, I owe you one, referring to her giving him a blowjob. But unbeknownst to him, he was connected to the truck component of the meat. So what has happened here is that when he was released from jail, we quickly realize that he is actually being observed by people that are working for Malkina, that are watching him and have been studying him and watching his movement patterns, because they know that he's connected to the truck shipment with all of the drugs inside. So stretched across the highway, one of the people that work for Malkina is sent to basically take him out. And so in the film, I'm just kind of skipping ahead, but basically one of the people that work for Malkina is known as the Wireman. And the Wireman is sent there to intercept, get the pickup location of the truck, which is inside the Green Hornets, the kid's helmet. And in one of the scenes, he stretches a piece of wire across the highway stretch that the boy is traveling on at night, and basically decapitates him and takes the helmet, which gives him the code or the directions to where the truck is, where it's located, containing the cocaine. And so he, starts to flip the switch. So Malkina has actually been plotting the whole time over Raina to take control of the drug heist and take the control of the ship's direction so she can sell it or distribute it with her people. So it's like really interesting that, because at the start of the film, it's like one of the things that Raina was talking about when he was talking to Malkina and his previous lovers is that he broke up with her because she was getting more pussy than him. So in terms of like their relationship being so open is also that whole concept of not one ever being enough, like being in an open relationship or being promiscuous while in a relationship is the norm. So it's like he even said it himself, like it's hard to trust when you don't know what they're up to. And he said also an interesting thing is that women get bored. If you go up to a woman and approach her directly, she'll just tell you to fuck off on the dance floor. You can do anything you want with a woman, but you can never bore them. And that's why he was always so obsessed with Malkina, because she never bored him and he never bored her. So in one of the scenes, there is a really very seductive and powerful scene. It's quite graphic, but it was used a lot in the promotion of the film, where Malkina and Raina drive onto a golf course in his sports car, in his convertible, and she basically fucks his car, where she gets up, takes off her panties, gets on top of the front of the windscreen of the car and rubs herself up and down on the car, seducing him and leaning her head in and kissing him upside down, which is just showing him like she is so like putting him under her spell. Like she really knows how to keep him on his toes. And he just didn't know what to make of it. And in the movie was asking the counselor, I don't even know what to make of it. It was so kind of like a fish going up the side of a tank. So it's like, it's quite graphic, but that scene in particular was very controversial in the film, but it was also just a celebration and an explosion of feminine power demasculating a man, and him thinking that it's real, and the whole time it's not. So yeah, it's really interesting there as well, the dynamic and the dichotomy between the relationships when you're dealing with characters that are so like high end. Everyone's right at the edge of how greedy they are and how much they can all get for themselves, like on a monetary gain level, on a sexual level, on like a living in luxury houses, this type of thing. So anyway, so back to the story. Everything's set in motion and it's all been agreed to, and now the direction has changed. So Wes Ray calls the counsellor to notify him that things have gone wrong and that something has happened, that the truck didn't end up going where it was supposed to, and that the cartel are now going to be looking at him because he was connected to Ruthie's son. Inadvertently, even though he didn't know, it's kind of shown that at the moment that her son is killed, Ruthie spiritually feels that he's dead. Like in a dream, she wakes up and she kind of, like she knows that her son is gone. And there's a scene where she reaches over to the wall on the side of her prison cell and sees the photo of him, there on her wall, and she can feel it. So there's kind of a play in that whole thing where it's like when someone's thinking of you, when you think of the dead can hear you. It's said, and esoterically, as an occultist, I can assure you that when you are thinking of someone, you are directing energy into the ether through to that person. How often do we, pick up the phone and someone dropped into our head and we just think, oh, I'm thinking of that person. I'll just send them a message saying I'm thinking of you. And how often at that moment they were thinking of you too, that type of thing. So it's a platonic deja vu, like in terms of everything's connected, even if you don't think it is. Something gets shifted here that you set in motion, and then something else along the line shifts the direction of it, but it's all kind of connected, even if you didn't know that it was to begin with. And so even though the counsellor has nothing to do with the interception of the drug truck, the cartel are going to now see him as the person responsible. And so Brad Pitt explained to him that the cartel don't believe in coincidences. They've seen them, but they just don't believe in them. And so this is where things start to really take a turn, because snuff films are an all too common reality. Like I mentioned, for this level of evil, they'll never go for the kill. They'll always go for the hurt, because it'll last longer. And ruining someone's life would be ruining them psychologically, not just killing them. That would be pointless, because then they'd be dead and there'd be no suffering. So the cartel know that. And he automatically thinks of Laura, his fiancée, and the counsellor starts to know that things are going to get fucking bad and wants to reach out to see what he can do. But of course, the timing of the whole thing is purely coincidental. And of course, then it really seals his fate. Also, as soon as the counsellor contacts Raina, telling him, something's gone wrong, something's happened, Raina begins to separate himself from it, and as if like, what are you going to do? What are your plans, kind of thing. And it's like, as soon as it, like I said before, positive and negative is in a favor of someone, when someone is doing something that's in your best interests, it's like Raina is friends with him and is encouraging him. But when it looks like it's not going to go the way that it was meant to, he's looking for someone to pin the blame of the mistake or the mishap on. And so Raina begins to detach himself. Wes Ray detaches himself completely from the counsellor, knowing that he's going to have to get out of there immediately and catch a flight out of Mexico to get out of there, because he'll be number one target, because he was connected to the drug traffic. So the whole thing starts to go really quickly sideways, and Raina is pursued. In the process of this meeting between Raina and the counsellor, Malkina is actually listening in another room, or just sitting outside with a wire, listening in on her iPad or something, where she's able, with a little ear device, so she's able to double check that everything's going on plan, so that she can pin it all on them, and they'll take the fall while she takes the true location of of the truck's shipment for herself. So it's like Raina would never have suspected that, and it's all coming to its kind of conclusion. So, and this is the second half of the film is where we kind of knew that something was really going to go wrong. And so the counselor begins to panic. Raina basically says, like, I'm out, and tries to make a run for it with the cheaters, but the cartel accidentally kill him, releasing the cheaters. They escaped, and they were supposed to bring him in to be making a snuff film of Raina or kill him, but they couldn't. So things start to take, that shift, and then the counselor begins to think about what he's done and begins to realize that the choices that he's made can't be unmade, and now he's put his potential wife in danger. And it's a really interesting thing where the counselor is supposed to be the counsel of others, but he reaches out for counsel of people outside of himself, and one of them being Marchetta, who's an older gentleman who is very kind of like a mystic almost, who's somewhat connected to the cartel, but isn't connected to the cartel in a way that involved this particular drug trafficking operation. And so he knows about life and, spirituality and concepts. And of course, the counselor calls him and starts to say, like, is there a way that I can, shift this? Because his girlfriend Laura has been captured, and she's very brutally, they catch her at the airport because she's trying to get away, but they get her at the airport and get her in the car. So she's under their, control. She's probably going to get killed. He knows that. And that's when he makes that very interesting phone call to, to his mentor, kind of saying, like, what do I do? How do I get out of this? And of course, the man says, like, the world that you live in is like the world that you have created. And when you cease to exist, that world that you have created as well will also cease to exist. And says to him that, with all of this grief, you can't lift it off your heart because grief is worthless. And so the counselor begins to just scream and cry in the car and is just totally freaking out because he's understanding that the stuff that was made of his nightmares is really the truth. And it's like the Marchetta says to him, you're at a crossroads, but the choice has already been made. Like, you chose the direction that you went in, and this is what happens. Life is a series of events and causes and effects that you set in motion, and they can't be undone. This is final. And it's like he begins to regret what he's done, but it's too late. And there's a scene actually before Raina is captured as well, where Cameron Diaz comes to Raina and she knows that he's going down. She can sense that something's up. And she says, before the axe comes through the door, I'll be gone. And he looks at her and says, I know, because he knows that she's smart enough to know that he's fucked and she can't help him and she's got to save herself. And if he really cared about her, he would have to let her go as well and not let her be complicit to anything that he had done. So it's like how we affect others based on what we're doing. And she looks around, and I love this line, actually. It's a really great line. And Melkina says to him, greed really takes you to the edge, doesn't it? And then he says, that's not what greed does. That's what greed is. And she's like, yep. It's, quite heavy, that scene, actually. Really beautifully done. And it's like all of the small things that they've done to each other kind of all come back on them. And it's really interesting. One of the lines I actually really love, I'm going to read some of the lines out. I've got them here. One of them is, I always liked smart women, but smart women is an expensive hobby. I think that's really interesting. So it's like, addressing what I talked about before, women and power. This film is about power and the misuse and use of power, the use of sex, the use of sexual influence, all of the things that make, Luciferic consciousness, pleasure seeking, wealth, greed, luxury, but on the top of someone else. So it's kind of like, if you've ever been, like, I can say this, but if you've ever been in really big roles or worked in big companies, at the very tippy top, this type of stuff and this type of personality is what is in the top of most business structures. Most business structures are the triangle structure. So at the very tippy top, a lot of executives and CEOs and things like that, and they have to answer to the shareholders, but it's like a lot of them, they're all playing each other to try and sustain their power and not let anyone come up from underneath them to take their role. So it's a lot of that going on in any operation, and this film is sharing that in a really powerful way. So what happens, just summarizing at the end, the counselor can't get a hold of Laura because she's gone, and he knows that her fate would have been, the snuff film. And he goes to a hotel, and it's like all of the power that he once had is now being completely stripped from him, because he would give up everything he has to just undo what's happened, but he can't. And so it's an exchange or a play on materiality, and how materiality is not ever going to compensate for emotionality. So love and material wealth are two completely different things. And he's starting to understand that he, has done what he's done. And so it's just like, you're so fucked now. And anyway, it's a really interesting scene. I'm not sure what to make of it. If you know this scene and you know what it's about, could you explain it a little bit more to me if you're listening and you've seen the film? There is a part where he goes downstairs to some level of protest in the streets, and, kind of living and staying in a hotel above a bar in New Mexico, in a very, very poor place in the world. It's almost like we see the counselor is stripped of his luxury and his power, and his might is gone. And so he's a broken man that's literally fucked his whole life. And then we see him walking into a scene with all these other people, and they're all standing around yelling, and this woman's screaming. And I think it's to do with something about her son. I think that Ridley was trying to communicate in this scene that even though he's suffering, there were people underneath him that were suffering way beyond his comprehension, because his wealth had divided him from a sense of reality of how most people actually live, and morality, of moral compass. So his moral compass was what was mentioned at the start of the film, which was his moral dilemma of actually doing what he's doing. And that with a paradoxical dilemma was what Rainer mentioned at the start. These complex problems in life create purpose in life as well. So I'm not saying that the purpose of life is to suffer, but the expansion of a human's life is proportioned to some level of suffering and love and having things ripped away from you and starting again. And it brings him to this place where he realizes that there was a whole world underneath his world that he thought he was too good for. He really had his head stuck up his ass the whole time and didn't want to see the reality of what he was involving himself in. There's a separation actually, between extreme wealth and extreme poverty. And one is usually built on the back of the other, and then the other doesn't want to see it. This was actually something that I talked about once in a film review that I did for a film called Nocturnal Animals, where Amy Adams's character is super rich, but she's super unhappy. And then she goes to that dinner party, and this closeted man that's living a lie and is living in luxury tells her that this isn't the real world. This isn't actually as bad as you think it is. The real world is actually having to work a 9 to 5 and scraping by every week to survive. Even though you're in some level of, boredom or discomfort in your marriage, it's actually better that you're here than it is to be in the real world. So I love that, because it's almost like evil knowing that it's evil and morally corrupt, but not prepared to face its shadow enough to actually embody the truth of what they're doing. So I've always found that, and that's one of the things that I want to talk about at the end of this film, is when all of the heist is done and everything's been completed, Malkina has to go and meet with her banker in London and take care of Westray and get him out of the way. So she sends a prostitute to seduce Brad Pitt's character, Westray, Natalie Dormer, and sends her there to sleep with him and steal the bank codes and everything that she needs from his briefcase. And then after she's got what she needs from the prostitute, she basically plays and taunts with her, and the prostitute says, "I don't want to get mixed up in anything heavy." And Malkina looks at her and she's laughing and she's like, "You already are. Like, this is yet again, what do you think you're playing with here?" Like, and she says, "I don't want the money." And she's like, "Take the money." And she's like, "No, I don't want it." And it's like, "Oh, please yourself." Malkina doesn't care. She just knows that she's played everyone and this is all the transaction and a game to her. Total psychopath. Which is also interesting because the concept of a psychopath in the spiritual world, although psychopathy is very much encouraged and almost indoctrinated in a modern world now, is that being in that level of disassociation from other people automatically forfeits the purpose of existence. And I often think about this a lot because if you have no love and you can't feel empathy for another human, then your life will just be reduced to like materiality and luxury. And you won't be able to truly share it with anyone because you've got no one, you can't build a real relationship with anyone because you don't feel anything with them. And so I see that in Malkina's character. I often think that, getting a little meta, but I often think that part of the concept of the modern world is to seduce materiality, which is what the film is also communicating. Because I think it was like either Bowie or David Lynch once said in an interview that we don't actually need 1,000 different cup designs. We just need one cup, because it's just one cup to drink from. We don't need a million, zillion different chair designs. It's a chair, you sit on it. We create these things to give ourselves purpose and confuse materiality with function and form or beauty. So it's like chasing something that really has no meaning anyway, in a lot of ways. So it's just really like heavy, but I'm trying to explain it in this way. So yeah, so after Malkina has the banking details on the codes, she sets the final chapter of her plan in motion and then has Brad Pitt killed with the Bolto device, which is wrapped around his neck in the streets of the banking district, and he's basically killed. And of course, it's a very painful and slow death having that happen. Once it's on your neck, you can't get it off, and it just keeps going and going all the way through to the thread. So she removed him out of the picture, and then now that's the final scene that we come to at the end of the film, which is so brilliantly done and so well acted and so chilling that I often at times will go back and rewatch this scene even on YouTube myself just to see that scene again, because this is her now celebrating her victory of getting what she wanted in the end, and she meets her banker Michael in a very expensive restaurant for a lunch. And they sit down and talk about how, she should use her money, and he kind of advises her, what she should do because she can't stay in Mexico. And she says, "I'm thinking of Hong Kong." And he's like, "Oh, Hong Kong, you don't speak the language." And she's like, "I'm a quick study." And then he says, "How are you going to move the money? Like, 20 million is a lot." And she's like, "Well, in diamonds. The fastest way to move money isn't in cash, it's in diamonds. You can hold $10 million in the palm of your hand." So she has got it so well planned out. And I've used her picture of her in the thumbnail that you can see here on the video now. The makeup, the lighting, the design, the hood, the way that she conducts herself in this character is just absolutely perfection. Like, it is perfect how everything is worked out. But one of the things that she says is in all of this, very heavy dialogue that you'll notice when you watch the film is, it is our faintness of heart that has driven us to the edge of ruin. So she knows that she doesn't have a big heart, and she knows what she's done is terrible, but it's her faintness of heart that has driven her to this point. And then she says, and the slaughter to come will probably be beyond our imagining. So she's actually making a reference to hell, or the lower astral there, where she's talking about how she knows that there will be a replay and there will be some kind of punishment for her being so evil. And she is aware of that. So it's like Hannibal Lecter type level evil, where it's like a being that is evil that knows actively that it's evil and what it's doing and chooses to do it anyway. That's a very different evil to someone that does something because they have an addiction, or because they made like a really terrible error and misjudged, squeeze the trigger on a gun, as a police officer so often can. Accidents happen. This is not an accident. This is a choice that she's aware of, and her being aware of the consequences spiritually. And Michael interrupts her at the end of the conversation and says, say no more. I wish to know no more. He knows that this is fucked. He knows that this whole operation, many people have been killed. He knows, but he also does the rich person thing where he's like, I don't want to look at it. I just turn away and look in the other direction. I don't care. So it doesn't concern me. I'm just going to get my money. And there's almost a look of disappointment with Michael when she says to him, you should get out. And he says, are you asking me, or are you telling me? And she's like, you'll thank me later, which would also probably be an indication that she's sparing his life. And if he doesn't get out of banking and get out of this operation, as she's saying, do so now, maybe she'll have him killed for, getting in her way. Often after operations go ahead in the criminal world, whether it's, whatever it is, drug trafficking, human trafficking, whatever, after it's done, the high powers that be will often play what they'll call a cleanup house, where they'll just go in and take everyone out in the operation and kill them all. That way, after it's done, it can't ever be traced back in years to come, kind of a way of guaranteeing that the operation was successful and that there's no way for it to be come back up from the deep later kind of thing. So it's her way of sparing him. She also says, nothing is crueler than a coward. And I think that that's a really powerful line. And I have often used that line and said that to people in my life, or, in general. The concept of a coward is someone that is a betrayer, someone that would turn on you for their own best interests, and is in a coward. It depends on what level it is, but someone who isn't facing the truth, someone who has no loyalty, they have no integrity, that type of thing. Nothing is crueler than a coward. Anyone who's living cowardly, that isn't facing themselves and expressing who they truly are, that's cowardly. Anyone who is working in an operation that hurts people or exploits people or traps people, and then they just kind of turn a blind eye to it, like, it's not as bad as they play things down. That's also very cowardly as well. And she's saying there's cruelty in that. He also asked her about the two cheaters after they were released, after Raina got killed and shot in the head. And she says Raul is, one of them died and Raul is alive and well in Mexico. And then she mentions how she misses him, and she misses seeing him out on the field chasing down rabbits at 100 miles an hour. And he says, is it sexual? And she said, yes, a thing like that is always sexual. So it's like she is so addicted to the violence and enjoys it. She loves the beauty of nature, and being a predator in, the facial makeup and the tattoos that she has actually are cheetah prints. So it's like she's taken on the characteristics of a cat. And, the cats are beautiful. The big cats like lions and tigers, cheetahs, leopards, panthers. The cat is a very independent and agile animal that is capable of extreme violence and death and beauty. And she has basically embraced that within herself to be like, take on the animalistic side of herself in a predatory way, not in a lower astral way where it's like people behaving like pigs. Because just getting a little bit meta, the higher astral is about the mind and about sacrifice to others and about love to others, and it's about truth to others. The higher celestial realms of the spiritual world are all accessed through God or through being wholesome, particularly around deeds of sacrifice of self for others in oneness. The lower astral is more in the demonic realm, which is more animalistic and bestial and sexual, and is all run by the lower half of the body in the dick and the clit, basically, just putting it really bluntly. So that's where she operates from, and that animalistic side of her is her nature. And she ties into that whole, maybe the Darwin theory, but also it's very much like pigeons and eagles. Like, I've done videos on that as well, pertaining to the facts that not all humans are equal. And, smart people control dumb people every day. That's life. Rich people overpower poor people. Eagles eat pigeons, or maybe they wouldn't even touch them. So one is a bird of prey and a predator, and she's embracing the beauty of that. And there is a certain loneliness that comes with that type of animal, So it's really well done in terms of what Ridley was communicating and putting into this film. There's so much I could go on about, but I just feel that the best way to understand this film is to watch it and take out the pre-notions of a Hollywood glamorous film that is very easy for you to understand. This film is complex. It is very psychological, and there is lots of physical allegories within the film that are directly reflecting back to us in society and in ourselves, about our own truth, about our own greed, about our own desires and lust, and the darker aspects of ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves about who we think we are. And, not facing your darkness will always be the thing that will destroy you. And that's really what the counselor's character did, is that he couldn't face his own darkness and the darkness took him. So it's like having the strength to be pure of heart, because the lower astral won't sacrifice itself for other people. It would rather sacrifice other people for themselves, to put others' lives before their lives as they're worthless type of thing, which is what happens all around the world in all different types of transactions. Bigger countries exploit third world countries, particularly around things like life. That's, you can buy humans, that type of thing. Poor women that are basically used to have babies for rich people, wet nurses, this type of thing, Handmaid's Tale stuff. That's all connected to themes within this film. So anyone who doesn't get it, I totally understand. But yeah, it's a really amazing film, and I really enjoyed talking about it. I've enjoyed sharing this with you. I think that it's one of my top favorite films. If you're more on the Sagittarian or Aries side, you might really appreciate this film and just all of the quotes and the scripts. And I know that the quotes and the way that they talk is unnatural, but it's meant to be unnatural. It's a film that is aware that it is a film while it's in the film, if that makes sense. So it's not keeping it natural. It's trying to show you the dilemmas and all of the themes directly. And so that's the power of this. There's a darker wisdom that Ridley Scott is trying to communicate in terms of forces in the world. And I love that the cartel are never shown. We don't ever see them. We don't need to see them, but we know that they're there and we know that they're watching, and they know that if any one of these characters did something wrong, they'll be getting a snuff film. So that is the end of my discussion on this film. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I really would love to see some different interpretations of this in in the comments below. If you have stayed along this long to listen to me, then I know it's been a big one. But it's been so worth it, and I had to do it in 2 parts because there's just too much to unpack, and there's also way more I could go on about, but I think it's probably best just to leave it here. And The Consellor, 2013, a Ridley Scott production, and Ridley has also done another TV series which I was very excited about called Raised by Wolves, which I have considered I will consider talking about at some point as well, which explores the the futuristic world and Lamia, and also AI and things like that. So be well. Thank you so much. Please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment. And if you do leave a comment and you have seen this film, and you know that scene that I was talking about, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that, because it would open up a door for me to understand something that I didn't understand in this film. Because nothing in this film was put there not purposefully, and I can't get it in the director's commentary because they don't really talk about it much, but maybe someone does. Maybe I got it right, don't know. Okay, lots of love. Bye, bye, bye.